Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how to build an upholstered storage bench. So if you're ready to get building, let's go. I think I mentioned in almost every video that we're currently living in a pretty small space. It's the reason I build the projects that I keep for myself with the most efficient storage possible. And this bench is no exception. We needed more storage for pillows, blankets, and clothes, and the end of the bed happened to be empty, so I added this bench. It's a really simple build, and you'll be surprised what I used to upholster it, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, let's make some sawdust. This project was sponsored by my friends at Kreg Tool. As with many of my projects, I use my handy Kreg pocket hole jig to create this piece, and I'm sharing some details about a sale that they're currently running on their jigs if you're interested in picking one up in the description below. Speaking of Kreg tools, I brought out my Kreg rip cut and circular saw to begin this project by cutting down my plywood sheet. I've got the full plans with details, dimensions, and cut list for this bench linked in the description below, and I'll also link a guide for how I cut down my plywood sheets as well in case you want to know more. I built this entire project from plywood except for the legs, and you could cut those from plywood as well, but I just used poplar to match the wood on my bed and my nightstands since this was going at the end of the bed. Once I had my strips cut down from my plywood sheet, I took them to the miter saw to trim to length. I cut 4 sides to make a box and 2 panels to make the top and the bottom of the bench. With all the pieces cut down, I begin assembling using pocket holes and screws. I drilled 3/4 inch pocket holes into the ends of the front and back box panels and along the bottom edge of all 4 box pieces using my Kreg K5 pocket hole jig. Now, because I'm covering this bench with fabric, I attached this so that the pocket holes were on the outside of the box. If you wanted to paint or stain this instead, I would recommend facing these pocket holes towards the inside of the box, leaving the outside smooth for a finish. When assembling, make sure to keep the pocket holes that go along the bottom edge facing the bottom. I accidentally installed one of the sides upside down and had to take it apart and redo it. Of course I did that. Luckily, the glue wasn't completely dry and it was a pretty quick fix, so I moved on with the rest of the project. Once the sides were assembled, I screwed the bottom panel in place. Then it was time to start upholstering. If you've never upholstered before, it's actually really fun, and I'm far from an expert, but I actually started upholstering before I ever started building things, so I'm taking it back to my roots here on this project. So I started with the top, and I used some 2-inch foam, placed the top on it, and then used a utility knife to cut it down to size. By the way, if you wanted a less fluffy top, you could use 1-inch foam here instead. Then I used some spray adhesive and stuck the foam to the plywood. Each type of spray adhesive is different, so be sure to follow the instructions on the can that you're using. Once that was dry, I wrapped the top in batting. You can find this at like Hobby Lobby, Walmart, Amazon, and most craft stores. I used my staple gun to attach the batting around the top, stapling it onto the bottom edge like seen here. At the corners, I just kind of pulled it tight and tried to fold it in. You don't have to get super technical about how you fold the corners in. Just make it look nice and neat. After I had 2 edges attached, I could cut the batting to fit and set the rest aside for the bottom of the box later. I continued stapling the batting around the top until it was covered. Then I wrapped the box with the leftover batting. I stapled the edge of the batting along the top edge of the box and then worked my way around. Once I got to the end of the batting strip, I cut it so that there was just enough to wrap around the bottom corner and stapled it in place. Then I repeated for the other sides. Where the batting came together, I just overlapped the edges, but you could cut them to length if you wanted. Now I basically repeated this whole process with the fabric. I had a really hard time finding fabric that I wanted to use for this project, and I actually ended up finding a Sherpa blanket to use for the top and a shower curtain to use for the bottom. As you'll see, I ended up ditching the Sherpa and keeping things monotone for this project, but if you're into faux fur, using a Sherpa as fabric is a pretty good idea that will save you a few bucks. Anyway, I measured the height of my box and cut my fabric a couple inches more than the height to give me enough to wrap around the edges. As a helpful tip, using fabric with lines or patterns helps you keep a straight line when cutting and stapling this fabric in place. This shower curtain had a waffle pattern, which made it really nice to use for this project. Just like with the batting, I began at the top of the box and stapled in place. This time I wrapped it all the way around and stapled it to the inside of the box to make sure that all of the batting was completely covered. I used the waffle lines as a guide to keep my fabric straight along the top. Then I did the same along the bottom, keeping a close eye on my waffle pattern to make sure that things stayed straight. When I got to the end of the fabric, I cut another strip and continued. It's not perfect, but to help keep the seams from being super noticeable, I just tucked the second strip of fabric under the existing strip at the joints and stapled in place. Once the box was covered, I started working on the top. I did this exactly like the batting, except that I folded over the edges to prevent any rough edges from unraveling and to keep it a little cleaner. Again, I used the waffle pattern lines to keep things straight. Also, just another tip, for the top, you'll want to pull the fabric tight for a nicer shape, but not so tight that it makes bulges on the sides. Trust me, if you give it a try, you'll get the hang of it pretty quick. And again, on the corners, fold and staple however you think looks best. This is not a science. Now that that was finished, I built the bench base. I used some scrap pieces of plywood for this, but you could also use 1x3s or 1x4s as well. I cut pieces to length to assemble a frame the same size as the bottom of the box. Then I attached the frame together using pocket holes and screws. Last year, about this same time, I built a dog bed with modern legs on it. I used that exact same template to draw legs that matched and cut 4 of them from some leftover poplar that I had in the shop. My bedroom set is made from poplar and I wanted this to match, but if you didn't care, you could cut these from plywood or any leftover 1x scraps that you wanted to. And for your reference, I'll add this leg template in the link in the description below. I cut these out using a jigsaw and then I edge banded the plywood frame and sanded everything smooth. Then I clamped the legs to the frame on each corner and attached so that they were at a 45-degree angle and inset equally from each corner. I used two 2-inch wood screws per leg to attach. And once the base was together, I could attach it to the bench seat. I screwed the frame onto the bottom of the storage box along all the sides. And the last thing to do was attach the top. I used 2 small hinges to attach the top. You could also use a piano hinge here if you prefer. I screwed these into the top first and then I screwed them into the box just like shown here. And for some extra support, I added these chest lid supports as well. I will link the hardware that I used here below if you want to check them out. And at this point it was finished, but I decided to add one more detail. I had some decorative nail heads in my craft supply drawer and I decided to use them here to create a tufted top. I simply used a hammer and nailed these where I wanted them to go. And again, the waffle lines are super helpful here to keep things lined up and spaced out evenly. And that was it. I brought it inside and filled it with all the things in our tiny home that I need to find a place for. There's room underneath to hide a few pair of shoes and plenty of room inside for blankets, pillows, backpacks, and clothes. And by the way, if you aren't as excited about upholstery as I am, this would be really nice simply stained or painted as well. I just prefer a nice cushioned seat. So if you're looking to add some storage to your home, be sure to grab the printable plans and all of the details on this project below, and be sure to subscribe to my channel because there will be plenty more storage projects to come soon. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy building!